Hello.
Welcome back to the Space Gulag, otherwise known as PPSW, your favorite handle place. We're back with another Star Wars story. Today we'll discover what would have happened had Master Yaddle trained the Chosen One. Before we begin this video, special thanks to our patrons, voice actors, and everyone else a part of the Pente Patrol team. Want a chance to win a lightsaber in our next giveaway? Watch to the end of the video and I can tell you exactly how you can win. Our story begins inside the Jedi Temple. A young boy walks through the halls, guided by two Jedi, one of them a Master and the other one a Padawan. They were currently leaving the Jedi Temple, and on their way back to the landing platform so that they may escort the Queen back to Naboo. These three had been inside of the Jedi Council chambers, where the Jedi Council informed them that Anakin Skywalker was not to be trained as a Jedi Padawan. He was too old to become a Jedi, and the Council believed that while he might be the Chosen One, he wasn't eligible to become a Jedi, and they feared him. Yaddle was a Jedi Master that was on the High Council, and she was filled with sadness. She was the Jedi that they would call an empath. While there were empaths throughout the galaxy, without having to be a Jedi, to be a Jedi and an empath gave Yaddle a desirable set of traits to be more caring and nurturing towards others. When the Order put it to a vote, there were few who decided it would be best to keep Skywalker within the Order, but most of the Council decided it would be best if Skywalker would be withheld from the Order. It wasn't up for debate at the moment, because it was a fact that the majority of the Council, including the Grand Master and the Master of the Order, voted against Skywalker. Sure, Plo Koon, Depa Billaba, and Yaddle thought that Anakin should be allowed within the Order, they couldn't match the vote of the rest of the Council. Yaddle felt really bad for Anakin. She could feel all the tragic, soaring emotions going through him. He felt like a failure, and he felt fear for what may happen to him on the onslaught of slavery, or if he might go back to that life again. Yaddle found this to be exceedingly tragic because he was just a boy, and Yaddle saw it. She believed that the Council was going against its mandate to help the galaxy become better. It was obvious that Anakin could be beneficial to the Order, but the Council refused it. The Council, instead of seeing Anakin for what he could become, they feared what he was. They went against their own code because of fear, and Yaddle found it to be very hypocritical. And while the vote was over and there was nothing Yaddle could do to change the vote, she wanted to open a discussion about it. But instead, the High Council was rambling on about the switch of power within the Senate. Yaddle listened as her fellow council members rolled over a boy who could inspire a generation of Jedi just to talk about politics. It was rather disheartening. But the council, with the exception of a few, was very invested in this conversation. Yaddle looked across the room. Mundi was rambling on about this, and then Eve Koth interrupted him. Oppa Rancis would speak over him and then be interrupted by Yariel Poof. It was very divisive as a topic. Every so often, Yoda and Windu would intervene, talking about the new Chancellor and the difference it could have for the Galactic Republic, pondering if it would change the stance of the Trade Federation, if the vote itself was a pity vote for Palpatine because of what was happening to his native planet. Yaddle noticed the silence from Plo Koon from across the room, as she looked over and observed him in his peace. When he had his disagreements with the Council, he always found peace, and she admired him for it. But his silence was almost meditative. Depa spoke up over another council member as the debates within the room continued. Yaddle looked over at him and then over to Eve and Peel, who was seated near her, who spoke up over the group and began talking about the chances the Senate had become corrupt. The conversation was rather bland. Most of what the council did was talk politics at this point. So much Yaddle thought of leaving her seat, but she stayed because she believed she could help the Order. Though, when the session ended, the council dispersed. Yaddle waited for the other council members to leave. Chances were she'd have a chance to talk to Plo. He was usually the first one into the chambers and the last to leave. For Yaddle, she wanted to talk to someone she often found equally as wise, and as a council disappeared, all that was left was her and him. Plo didn't leave. He was waiting for her, because by her watchful eyes, he assumed that she wanted to talk to him about something. For Plo, he spent a lot of time in the council chambers, whether or not there were members in it. He often found it at times to be very peaceful, but he knew Yaddle wanted to talk, so he waited. Yaddle spoke up as she told Plo that she felt the council was incorrect on its decision regarding the boy, Skywalker. Plo nodded his head as he turned over and looked at her. She told Plo that she believed that Skywalker could positively affect the Order if he were allowed to stay within the Order and train under Qui-Gon or another Jedi. Plo reminded Yaddle of how the Council felt about Masters Dooku and Qui-Gon. The two of them were off kilter, and while they weren't wrong for their thoughts, the Council wasn't overly fond of their opinions on the Council's decisions. Yaddle nodded her head because, of course, she knew this. She suggested to Plo that when Jin and Kenobi returned, that they bring the issue back up to the Council. Yaddle then spoke without holding back, suggesting that she could teach Skywalker. This came out of her mouth. She didn't actually anticipate saying it. Plo nodded his head as he asked Yaddle if she really wanted another apprentice. She had been a master so many times, just like Yoda. But for Yaddle, she was done teaching students individually, just like Yoda was. But if she was willing to train Skywalker, Plo believed that she'd be the best individual to do so. Yaddle asked Plo for his thoughts on the matter. Plo told Yaddle that the council would most likely approve of her training Skywalker over Qui-Gon training the boy. If there were any inclination to believe that Jin would train the boy, then the council would most likely not support it. On the terms of rearranging the vote, it again, as Plo believed, depended on who the teacher was. With Yaddle, he believed the council would accept it, but Plo told Yaddle to meditate on it, as he believed she said it out of empathy, instead of a personal desire to teach him. Yaddle nodded her head as Plo stood up, bowed to her, and walked out of the room. Tragically, across the galaxy, Qui-Gon was losing his battle to Darth Maul. He was stabbed through the stomach, and his eager young apprentice was going to try and save him. Though a very intense duel happened, Obi-Wan used all of his strength, agility, and speed to take the fight to Maul and try to kill him. The duel between Maul and Kenobi was intense, but it ended up with Kenobi using the low ground to flank Maul and beat him with a leap over his head, cutting the Sith apprentice in half and allowing him to fall down what appeared to be a bottomless hole. By the time Obi-Wan got to Qui-Gon, he was dying in his arms, asking that Kenobi would promise him to train the boy. Obi-Wan promised his dying master that he would try and train the boy, the best he could. How could he not? This was a dying wish of his master. Even though Obi-Wan disagreed with what Qui-Gon believed and felt towards the council, even if the two butted heads more often than not, it was important that Obi-Wan do what his master asked. It was a sign of respect, and it was a sign that the man that Obi-Wan had become because of his teacher. Obi-Wan held his master in his arms and watched him die in his eyes. The call would break the hearts of many within the Order, not as much as the heart of Dooku. The Jedi Master was so broken up about the death of his apprentice, he decided he wouldn't go to Naboo. Instead, he would just leave the Order indefinitely. He saw the death of Qui-Gon as a fault of the Jedi Council, and a shame of everything that had been done. The Jedi Council would move out of the planet to see the peace talks ensue with the Naboo and the Gungans coming together as one planet, uniting the species together to form an alliance not seen in centuries on Naboo. Though Master Yoda had to talk to Obi-Wan, he was very clearly past the trials by killing the Sith who was on Naboo, but what came next Yoda would have never anticipated as Obi-Wan pleaded to train the boy. Yoda couldn't let Obi-Wan train the Chosen One. Even if the Council elected to allow Anakin into the Order, it was wrong. Obi-Wan was young for this responsibility, too young. But it seemed not everything Obi-Wan was taught by Qui-Gon was forgotten, because young Kenobi was just as stubborn as his master was. Yoda told Obi-Wan that he would discuss it with the Council, ensuring that in some way, shape, or form, that he would be able to participate in the training of Anakin Skywalker. First, the ceremony of burial would take place, where Qui-Gon would be burned and his ashes would be left as the remnants of his human form transcended into the Force. When the Jedi weren't on Coruscant, it was the most natural way to allow a Jedi safe passage after their death, so that they had the opportunity to become one with the Force. Obi-Wan, being who he was willing to trust the Jedi Grand Master, as he would hold Yoda responsible for his promise to Qui-Gon. Yoda of course understood, and while he didn't know Dooku left the Order at this point, Yoda understood the loss in losing somebody. Because Yoda had the burden of raising so many students, teaching so many Jedi, watching so many of them grow old, and then sadly watching them pass away from old age. It was a poison that came along with being a part of Yoda's species. It was the great dilemma of live forever but lose everyone you've ever cared for. Sure, the Jedi were supposed to be emotionless, but losing all of your students by watching them grow up, get old, and then wither away while you seemingly hadn't aged a day since their birth, it was hard to deny it was difficult to watch. Regardless, with the funeral over and the Jedi returning to Coruscant, Obi-Wan would immediately be separated from Anakin when they arrived at the temple. Skywalker was taken to the Youngling Wing, which he would begin his early teachings. Obi-Wan was kept in the dark about the entire situation. It was rather difficult for him to deal with because he was kept away from knowing if he could fulfill his promise to Qui-Gon. Though inside of the council chambers, debate was surging. The council was rather furious that Obi-Wan promised to train Skywalker. Obviously, the three who were on Skywalker's side were perfectly fine with it, and they were defending it. The Jedi continued their rounds as they went almost at each other's throats. The ever-so-quiet Plo Koon looked over at Yaddle as he locked eyes with her. Plo nodded his head, as if to suggest she do what she said she would do. Yaddle stood up and walked into the middle of the room, in the heat of debate, and said that she would like to take on the teaching role for Anakin Skywalker. Windu looked at her and asked that she not be a martyr for someone who would most likely fail his way out of the Order. Yaddle snapped back at him, asking who was by his side when he was doubted as a youngling. Or, as Yaddle looked across the room to Eth Koth, asking where he held his respect for someone like Skywalker after every face of adversity he took on as a youngling. Yaddle demanded answers as she looked at all the council members who were younger than her. The same council members who had their trials and tribulations and had someone like Yaddle in their corner. She asked why the council were to act on such a despicable manner towards someone who faced a different upbringing. If the Jedi wanted to follow the code to such a desirable level, then maybe their thoughts shouldn't be on politics, but by the obvious amount of slavery that was still in the galaxy. If Skywalker is a slave, then it was a proof that the Republic and the Jedi didn't uphold the mandate of the High Republic laws surrounding the banishment of slavery, or the practices of enslavement of another individual or a group of individuals from another planet or star system. Yaddle continued as she explained that the Jedi were seemingly losing their touch on the galaxy, and they needed to return to being productive in helping those who were in need, because it was obvious that not everyone was getting the help they needed or were supposed to get. Most of the council was rather surprised. Yaddle wasn't one to go off as she just did. She was reserved and quiet all the time. For her to jump up and say what she just said to the entire council had them almost all in disbelief. Yaddle again said she would train the boy, and that was the end of discussion, admitting that she would assist Kenobi with his promise so that in a few years' time Yaddle would be able to pass the torch to Kenobi. That was if he was ready or felt like he was wanting to take on the training of Skywalker without her. This way, Anakin could receive proper training and Kenobi could fulfill his promise to his master. Yaddle walked out of the council chambers at her slow pace as the chamber sat in silence. Windu and Koth, specifically, didn't really have much to say, especially not after she called them both out for their ludicrous behavior. Yaddle made her way down to the youngling wing, to where young Skywalker was. She had plans to take over his training immediately. Yaddle knew that the teachers in the youngling wing got a hold of Skywalker, and the chances of him losing his mind or being treated unfairly were entirely possible to happen. To avoid that from happening, she was going to ensure that she taught Anakin everything he needed to know. Yaddle, being an empath, would have a much easier time training Skywalker, especially since most of the youngling teachers weren't nice, kind, or empaths. They were usually very rough and belligerent, and sometimes they were even more brutal to students who were individualized. In other words, the students who needed to be trained one-on-one, they could be really rough on them. Yaddle also knew that the kids could be indifferent towards a newbie, especially one that was their age, proclaimed to be the savior of the Jedi Order. While Anakin spent the first part of the day getting introduced to where he'd be living and all the places he was permitted to visit, he was mostly going through the motions. Another shakeup would have him losing his mind, so with the shakeup came Yaddle. She was a little shorter than Anakin, which for a boy from Tatooine, he saw this as almost weakness. Not that he was an exception in any way for being small, but she was a Jedi Master, much smaller than he. It made him almost question what the Jedi had planned. Anakin already had preconception that he wasn't liked or wanted within the Order, no thanks to the treatment he got when he was first introduced to the Jedi Council. Regardless, Yaddle made sure that Anakin understood that she would be his guide. Anakin asked about Obi-Wan. Anakin had no reason to trust the Council because of their treatment of him, and he had no reason to trust Yaddle because of that too. Yaddle understood, but she also understood that the only person Anakin would feel remotely comfortable around within the Jedi Order was Obi-Wan, so that's why she brought Anakin to him. Yaddle informed Kenobi about her plans to train Skywalker and him together, and Obi-Wan was perfectly fine with it. He seemed to welcome the idea of being trained with one of the Order's best. Yaddle was a great teacher, and he saw opportunity as one that could help him become more of what Anakin needed him to be. Obi-Wan was very stressed about teaching Anakin, and while it was obvious that he might be a little in over his head, he was still willing to do it for Qui-Gon. When Obi-Wan got with Yaddle and Anakin, young Skywalker was able to calm down and distress. Though, once the talking began, he didn't believe he'd be able to keep up. So much conversation of the future and what would hold for Anakin Skywalker. One thing was for sure though, Yaddle was going to train Anakin exclusively inside the Jedi Temple. She believed it would be the perfect location. Yaddle also knew that she couldn't change Anakin or who he was before. She wanted to be the best thing she could be for Anakin, and what it seemed to be is that Anakin needed a maternal figure. Of course he lacked a father, but more than anything, his mother was his biggest support on Tatooine. Yaddle also knew that she had to be responsible for Anakin, and she couldn't leave him alone here. So she would help ensure the Council did something about the slavery issue. Regardless, Yaddle took Anakin and informed him that she and Obi-Wan would be his guides. Their sole purpose was to aid Anakin in his learning endeavors. Yaddle told Obi-Wan that she would handle the introductory courses for Skywalker, and then she would slowly push Obi-Wan into the role of teacher for him. Yaddle's entire plan revolved around her ensuring that Anakin had the easiest path to development without spoiling him or pampering him. Yaddle dismissed Obi-Wan as she walked with Anakin, asking him numerous questions about the life he led on Tatooine. She wouldn't understand the boy she was working with. He was very open about everything, and he told Yaddle about his life on Tatooine. He talked about all the things that made him happy and sad and everything in between. Stories were told to Yaddle about his life, but something seemed ever more present than anything else, and it was the fact that Anakin missed his mother. For a typical Jedi, this was something that ought to be taken away from a Jedi training, but for Yaddle, she saw it as particularly heartbreaking. To hear how much a boy missed his mother made her wonder what it would have been like for her had she known her mother. As an empath, Yoda could feel the pain, but to understand it was a different story. Yaddle and Anakin walked into a separate room that overlooked the city of Coruscant. It was typically used for sparring sessions, but Yaddle was reserving it for her new student. Yaddle turned around and faced Anakin on the opposite end of the room, as she began to tell Anakin that as a master, she would do everything in her power to teach Anakin ways of the Force. She found it very important that she be as transparent with Skywalker as possible, and in such transparency, she asked that Anakin be upfront with her about how he felt towards everything that was happening to him. Anakin asked about the code. Yaddle told Anakin to disregard the code. Anakin had the opportunity of a lifetime with a teacher made for him. Yaddle told Anakin that she would show him the patience and dedication that he would have gotten had Qui-Gon been alive to guide him. And while she was very sorry for the loss of Qui-Gon, she was going to do everything in her power to make sure this experience was remarkable for Anakin. Skywalker looked at her with optimism, but also a bit of fear. How could he not have fear? He was all alone, and with a new teacher he'd never met. But he looked at Yaddle, and in her eyes he saw determination. Anakin could tell that Yaddle was going to be his master, and the only master that he would ever need. And then, Yaddle lifted herself up into the air and backflipped onto one of her short legs and stood with the other one cresting up towards the inside of the other leg. She moved her hands around and told Anakin that their lessons would be getting started now. The first lesson would consist of basic aerobics. For Anakin, this would be great for loosening himself up and naturally connecting to the Force. For Yaddle, this was something that was particularly good for her, at teaching especially, because of her small size. Yaddle had to get used to working as hard as she could to use her small body as effectively whenever she happened to help somebody. Anakin caught on quick, but the faster Anakin caught on, the more work he'd be given. Yaddle would use his time to talk to Anakin. Yaddle wasn't strict and by any means. While for a normal youngling day it would consist of about 5 hours of study in class and about 3 hours of physical work, Anakin's day consisted of about 5 hours of both class and physical work. It was because Anakin was excelling rapidly, and Yaddle found more productivity with Anakin through basic conversation rather than organized study. So while he was required to study in the classroom, it wasn't productive. It was a mandate ordered by the High Council to try and keep Skywalker in a box, so Yaddle wrote around the rules. The two would utilize training rooms across the temple, also using the archives and the temple gardens for study. Anakin's development was accelerated by a teacher that he had. With Yaddle giving him consistent information and inspiration, he was able to find peace of mind. On top of that, Yaddle was pushing the council to revoke slavery galaxy-wide. It was working, and they were starting to send masters and knights out to put down slavery operations across the galaxy. Anakin was having struggles with homesickness, but Yaddle was able to help Anakin with something she didn't know she'd be able to teach him. Yaddle guided Anakin through the realms of inner peace, and worked to perfection. Anakin thrived on inner peace. It took trials, sleepless nights, and the insatiable desire to feel that peace, but Yaddle was known for her inner peace within the high ranks of the council. But the maternal effect on Skywalker gave him the feeling that felt as if his mother were truly with him. Yaddle also opened up the transparency link between master and student. This allowed Anakin to be more honest and open with his master, which built their bond faster than maybe even Qui-Gon would have. Yaddle continuously pushed Anakin through, and while the short hours of his schedule would make one assume he was being pampered, he was not. For normal students, their 8-hour-plus days happened because they were in classes of 20 or 30 students. These classes had to bring everyone with them and make sure everyone stayed together. For Anakin, he was alone, with one of the best teachers in the Order, though one not often discussed by other Jedi. Yaddle was often left out of the conversation of best teacher because she hadn't taught in so long, but seeing the development of the Chosen One showed them to trust in her methods. While what most of Yaddle was doing was technically against the code, she made it very apparent that she had no intentions in following the code with her heart. All Yaddle wanted to do was make sure that Anakin had the natural progression into the prodigy that he was meant to become. Because Anakin was the chosen one, and he should be treated as such, not pampered but prepared as one should be. Anakin appreciated Yaddle's dedication, and on top of their training together, Obi-Wan would get involved, but more or less, he was watching how Yaddle took care of Anakin, as if he were her own child. Obi-Wan didn't know how to do that. He had to learn the ways of the empath, and the ways of a teacher who had experience with dozens of students. Yaddle did her best to help Obi-Wan with getting used to training Anakin, but truth be told, she was moving at a fast rate. It wasn't Obi-Wan's fault for not being able to keep pace, it was just a matter of Obi-Wan finding his own rhythm. But Yaddle was quick, and Anakin was keeping up. This wasn't against Obi-Wan. If he were training, he would have been able to be fine keeping up with Yaddle, but he was learning how to be a teacher. Learning to be a teacher was much more difficult than Obi-Wan presumed it to be, and that's what he didn't think about when he took on this responsibility. For several more years, Yaddle and Anakin would continue to bond. Obi-Wan backed off the scene though. He thought it would be best for Anakin to be trained by Yaddle, and Anakin got older as he respected Obi-Wan for that decision. As Anakin got into using lightsabers, he began to practice with Yaddle, which was more challenging than Anakin ever thought it would be. Instead of going into being a youngling, Anakin essentially spent his entire time within the Order as a Padawan. There was also good news. Over the past couple years, slavery had been fully ended on behalf of the High Council, and their actions led to the freedom of millions, including Shmi. It forced the Republic crack down on slavery in the Outer Rim and the crime families. This was the first notable thing the Jedi had done since the times of the High Republic, and the entire Republic population was eating it up. They saw the Jedi as heroes again, and the High Council realized their transcending ability to garner respect from those around the galaxy by following their own mandate. Anakin was happy to hear about his mother's freedom, and alone this gave growth into an inner peace he found almost at an unfounded level of happiness. Anakin's growth as a young Jedi allowed him to develop into a wonderful young man who had very little issues with ego, anger, darkness, rage, or even sadness. Anakin very openly discussed his feelings on life with Yaddle, and because of that, she used her age, guidance, and wisdom to place Anakin on the path he needed to be on. Anakin developed a similar style of lightsaber combat as Yaddle. Now, Yaddle was very active with the Force when it came to combat, but in terms of using a lightsaber, she was extremely skilled with Forms 3 and 4. While she was in her late 400s, she had plenty more of information to learn, and she made sure that Anakin knew that as well. Because no matter how good, educated, skilled, or experienced one was, the best mindset to have was that there was always more to learn. Yaddle kept this mindset close to heart as she passed it on to Anakin. The two of them, after a year or two inside of the temple, started going out of the temple. The main bulk of Anakin's original training was all inside the temple, and because Yaddle, he was able to grow from it. After that, they went out into the galaxy. Anakin learned a lot about being underestimated, because his master was always treated inadequately whenever a scrap started. Anakin and Yaddle got along better than anyone else could have. As Anakin continued to age, Yaddle would surprise Anakin with a visit to his mother on Tatooine, as a reward for all the hard work her apprentice put into the last several years of training. Anakin would of course be extremely grateful for the opportunity, and it would motivate him to continue to excel in his studies. Yaddle again saw the capacity of what this meant to be him. As a Jedi without the ability or having been taught not to feel, it was incredible to see the effect that this had on Anakin. Yaddle and Anakin were inseparable, but for Anakin there was something remarkable. When he was just 18, Yaddle believed him to be ready to pass the Padawan trials. It wasn't hard. Anakin was one of the most impressive students within the Order, and even some of those who were in the Council that found the capacity to find respect for him and believe in him. His accomplishments were incredibly admirable. Though now he was no longer to be an apprentice, he didn't know what to do. He felt complete. He was 18. He felt a level of surreal happiness that most people wouldn't feel in their entire lives. At which point, he and Kenobi encountered each other again. Obi-Wan tried to be present when he could, but now the two of them, as knights, could become friends. While Obi-Wan was granted the ability to become a master for his time spent with Anakin, he decided that he didn't earn the rank of master, and elected to stay a knight until he trained his own student. For the next year and a half, the two of them would go on missions all across the galaxy with each other, and form a much tighter bond. For Anakin, this was great because he was able to become close with someone who wasn't his master. Luckily, because of Yaddle being Anakin's master, they weren't on world when a chemical was developed. Another master and apprentice duo perished stopping the bomb. As for this year, there was trouble in the skies of Coruscant. Padme Amidala's starship was bombed. Luckily, she wasn't hurt or killed. The Chancellor suggested putting Anakin on the case, but Mace Windu and the other council members informed the Chancellor that Anakin was off-world. Instead, Obi-Wan Kenobi would be put onto the case, which through a certain chain of events would lead to him on the streets of Coruscant, all the way to Kamino, and then all the way to Geonosis. While Anakin was offered the chance to take Padme to Naboo, he informed the council he couldn't be there. He was still currently settling a dispute on Ryloth. It was causing a lot of tension between the upper class and lower class of the planet. It was really difficult, and Yaddle was called down for reinforcements for Anakin. She had the wisdom to help him out with this situation. Though the issue really began when the Jedi were called from Ryloth to go to Geonosis to confront the Separatists who'd captured Obi-Wan Kenobi. They put him in an arena and planned on killing him. He was able to escape, and then 200 Jedi descended on the arena, following a massive battle ensued. Yaddle and Anakin were late to the party, and they would be guided by an LAAT into combat. The only issue is that through the fog of the battle, they were able to trace Count Dooku back to his lair on Geonosis before he could escape. Yaddle and Anakin would walk in, side by side. Yaddle wasn't moving fast, but they got in just in time for Dooku to turn around. Yaddle knew this would be difficult. Dooku was a fine duelist. He could very easily make a fool out of the two of them. So, they had to play this very safe, which is exactly what Anakin planned on doing. There was no chance for surrender. Dooku had gone way too far in this scenario, but this wasn't vengeance. He needed to be stopped before he did more damage or killed more people or more people suffered for his actions. 3 lightsabers ignited. Yaddle tried to keep her former student behind her. It wasn't her fault, it was maternal instincts that she had for Anakin. She wanted to keep him safe, without realizing the danger that she was causing the two of them. Dooku skipped past Force powers. He knew Yaddle was strong there, and he would have challenged Yoda to prove a point, but with Yaddle, he had nothing to prove, so into lightsaber combat they entered. Yaddle jumped forward and prepped a defense as she leveraged herself into Form 3. Anakin, on the other hand, moved around from side to side to add an extra layer of defense for his master. He knew Yaddle would need it. Dooku was renowned for his prowess with a lightsaber. The Count jumped in as he swung his blade to the ground as Yaddle blocked it. Dooku continued as he spun around and round as he pushed a 4-point saber combo against Anakin. Skywalker was impressive for 19 as he held his own, blocking every strike that came his way. Anakin shoved and pushed as he looked into the eyes of Dooku while he held his own. He knew Dooku wouldn't back down. Yaddle jumped into a counter-offensive, pushing forward towards Form 4. Dooku felt the presence behind him as he shoved Anakin back and swung his blade behind him. Dooku moved effortlessly, with one hand gently placed behind his back as he danced with Yaddle. She leapt around, swinging her blade and flipping, avoiding each strike that he took at her. Anakin saw this and took his ground back as he jumped forward as Dooku outstretched his arm behind him and shot lightning at Anakin, to which he deflected, and held as he growled under his breath. Anakin threw the lightning away as Dooku kicked Yaddle in the face before turning around and pushing his offensive against Anakin, dragging his second hand around and placing it on the blade as he carried it to attack Skywalker. Anakin stumbled back. Dooku was much more challenging than he would have thought. For being his old age, he fought like a younger man. Dooku swung violently, getting angrier and more powerful with each strike. Yaddle saw her apprentice stumbling as she leapt around the corner, jumping off the wall and moving down towards Dooku. The Count expected it. He figured out the strategy. As he brought his blade around back and swung at Yaddle, she blocked it and then tumbled to the ground without her blade as it fell to the ground. Dooku swung down and Anakin cried out as he swung to stop the blade. When he looked down though, he saw Yaddle was holding Dooku's lightsaber in the palm of her hands. The blade was stabbing the Force. She used her power in the Force to save her boy. Anakin struck forward as Dooku tried to panic, but before he could panic, he felt cold, and moments later he fell back onto the ground, dead. Anakin looked down at Yaddle as she took a deep breath. She looked at Anakin and told him that she was very proud of him. Anakin got down to her level and thanked her for saving his life as he wrapped his arms around her. Yaddle may have not expected this, but she did welcome it, as she embraced her former student as well. Anakin looked at her, stood up, and then bowed to respect his master. Eventually Yoda would show up to the scene of the battle, but it was over, nothing for him to help with. Now there was one large issue within the galaxy. The Clone Wars were on the horizon, but there was weakness within the Separatists. Even worse, a chink in Palpatine's armor. He lost the leader of the opposition, this very person who could help the Separatists stay at war. There was uncertainty about the war to begin with within the Separatist alliance, but when the Republic deployed 200,000 clones at the site of tension, there was fear. There was no one to raise confidence. See, Dooku was a political leader. Grievous was a warrior. Grievous could not fill the same shoes. No one could, unless they were a Sith apprentice. But seeing that Sidious no longer had one, the Separatists would fill that role with their own leader. And because of the alarming size of the Republic army, the Separatists would get cold feet. Not the Trade Federation nor the Techno Union, but because they had the numbers to have an actual war, but the political Separatist alliance did not have the same luxury. They weren't equipped with an all-out war to face a faction that had an army deployable at the ready, and with the full support of the Jedi behind it. Weeks after the Battle of Geonosis, Separatist worlds would begin to align themselves with the Republic, but this would begin to draw issues from within the Senate, not for the senators nor their delegations, rather the Chancellor. With the Separatists avoiding war at all costs, and the war-happy Chancellor being in the same room, tensions began to flare within the Galactic Republic Senate. Because it was under Palpatine that this first skirmish happened. No one knew it was a Jedi who jumped into combat to save their own. All they did know is that the Republic found a massive array of droids on Geonosis, and the Republic fleet leapt down their throat, without remorse. And because the Techno Union and the Trade Federation were mostly war-oriented at this point, they slowly began to lose favorability with the banking clans. Politically, it wasn't smart as a move for the banking clans, so they backed away. The first month after Geonosis saw the entire erosion of 10-year plans set up by Palpatine and Dooku. Without a party leader, there was a genuine fear for the Separatists. Without a leader, their only face was the terrifying General Grievous, who somehow managed to lose the biggest ship ever produced in galactic history in the span of less than a week. The Malevolence tore through Republic fleets until the Republic tore through it. A shameful end to a technological terror. While the Senate found it reason to see Palpatine as damaging to public relations with the Separatists and even the Neutral Systems Coalition, backed by Mandalore and Duchess Satine, pressure began to build on the inside to remove Palpatine from power, which would happen. They would remove him and elect Bail Organa in his place, because he was very moderate and seen by all with respect. The Clone Wars were shortening. Grievous was finding no luck, and he was defeated by Kit Fisto at his lair. The Separatists were failing, and with the defeat of Admiral Trench over Christophsis and Captain Tuck over Ryloth, the movement was an obvious failure. Newt Gunray was also captured on the Rhodian homeworld by Jar Jar Binks and Padme Amidala. Even worse, without direction from Dooku, because he was dead, Asajj Ventress would have none of the opportunity to steal Newt Gunray back into the hands of the Separatists. With Palpatine out of office, Bail Organa would negotiate the terms of surrender for the Trade Federation and the Techno Union. These terms were to surrender all property to the hands of the Galactic Republic. All of their vessels of war would either be dismantled or solely operated by the clone troopers. Because the war didn't last that long, the clones needed jobs, and replacing thousands of droids within the Techno Union and Trade Federation facilities, it would be the perfect place to put them. It also helped them pay off all the money they owed to the Kaminoans. With Palpatine out of the picture, he would have to conjure up a new plan. But the sad truth for him is that there wasn't much to work with. Pong Krell was a possible lead, but with the war ended and no reason to face a great darkness, there was no reason for him to feel the need to leave the Jedi. Even worse for Palpatine, Anakin was never seen. Skywalker, when brought back to Coruscant after the war was legally ended, would be brought by Yaddle to a special training room inside of the Jedi Temple. There he would be introduced to Grogu for the very first time. He was extremely young and very fragile, but Yaddle told Anakin that one day he could train him. For now, he would have to pick a student or wait. Currently, Ahsoka Tano was being trained by Obi-Wan Kenobi, and they were off at Mandalore, trying to see this news about the Death Watch, which would result in a victory for Kenobi, Satine, and Ahsoka. Palpatine would return to the depths, and there he would find his former apprentice, Maul. He would try and nurse Maul back, but it would only be a matter of time until Maul would betray and kill Sidious for leaving him alone on Naboo for so long. Though the only issue that would arise is that Maul would have just continued the legacy of the Rule of Two. He would never find his brother, and instead, he would try and continue the legacy of the Sith, until one day, by mistake, he ran into Anakin Skywalker and his Padawan, Daisha Numa, and he was killed, without a fighting chance to fight off these two powerful beings. After a while, Daisha would join the ranks of the Jedi Knights, and Skywalker would become a Jedi Master. Shortly after, he would become a council member alongside of Obi-Wan Kenobi, his good friend. The council would see much growth as it slowly departed politics. When Yoda passed of old age, Yaddle would fill the role of Grand Master, and Windu would step down from Master of the Order, to which Anakin would fill that role. The Jedi would work their way back, and the Republic would find itself in another golden era. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is our story. Again, special thanks to Benjamin Wells, Icy Raptor, Mad Mana Studios, Anakin003, and Gort for supporting the channel. Let's hit 2,000 likes on this video. We got another video out relating to Tales of the Jedi, which is coming out. This one was obviously inspired because Yaddle was coming out today. If you want to see what if, let me know below. We're at constant do crossovers. Check out the Twitch community, Discord, and Patreon if you want to support me in other ways. For a free lightsaber, go down below. There's a doc. You click on the doc and you read the doc. You type your name on the doc. I will approve all the names. We give away lightsabers at 50K. We are almost there. We're 10,000 away. When we give away those lightsabers, I will announce them in videos. Don't pay attention to people in the comment section. Those are scammers. That is not me. I announce all winners of giveaways in videos. Let's talk about our story. So this one was fun for me. Now, originally, I'm going to say this. Originally, I was going to have Dooku kill Yaddle, but I didn't want to do that. I don't know if that would technically be a spoiler for Tales of the Jedi. I don't really know yet because it hasn't come out. It actually just came out. It's 3 in the morning right now, but I have not seen it yet. So I don't know. I'll find out when I'm done recording this because I'm super excited to watch Tales of the Jedi, but I figured doing something for Yaddle because I wanted to do this video for a while. I had this thumbnail for the longest time, and I was like, I'll save it for when Tales of the Jedi comes out. And I think for Yaddle, I think she's a very underappreciated character, but I also would approach this much differently. Now, in the past we've done with Shaak Ti, for example, a very maternal-like character for Anakin to have, and I wanted to do that but heighten it with Yaddle, because I think on top of that, I feel like Yaddle would be an empath. Now, that was kind of me bringing in something from our own world into a story to kind of make it feel more realistic for those of us that might know empaths or might be empaths, whomever you might be, and that might be something relatable for you, as being an empath, being able to feel what other people feel, or kind of understand what other people are going through. And that's what I wanted Yaddle to be. I wanted her to be more of what Anakin needed, and have a transparency that I don't think Shaak Ti would have had. Now, we don't know a whole lot about Yaddle's character, but we do know that, and I made a reference to it in the story, that she sacrificed her life for Anakin. And again, I kind of wanted to pay homage to that and kind of acknowledge that this person, this character, has the ability to really be compassionate and be what a Jedi really should be. And transparency, I think, is something that she would have really been. And I think she would have gone against the Council's wishes on that. I think she would have been transparent with Skywalker. And I think that's where the story is very positive from. I think the story is relatively positive. And while I could have done more with the ending, I really thought it would be different, and I thought it'd be fun to have like the entire deconstruction of the Separatists, because Dooku dying on Geonosis is like a really bad thing for the Separatists, and I want to acknowledge that real quick, because I'm not just trying to throw the story away. I mean, obviously I could have just been like, oh, when the rest of the war happened and cities got killed, da-da-da. No, I didn't want to do that. I wanted something else to happen, because Dooku being killed raises a whole level of political concern for the Separatists. That is like their leader. That is like the person that sits in their Congress and tells them like, oh yeah, this is like, he's like their prime minister essentially. He's their president, he's their prime minister, whatever you want to call him, that's what he is. And he's that representative for the Separatists, and because he is Palpatine's apprentice, he does everything Palpatine tells him to do, which he just translates back to the Separatists. But he's dead, and the Republic just released a massive army, like a giant army, and then sweeped the Separatists. Like, if you weren't on board about the war and you were kind of like, well, you know, I politically am not with the Republic, and then the Republic just drops an army and destroys the biggest foundries, the biggest planet for foundries in the galaxy, or takes that planet, you might be thinking, this is probably not the right place for me to be at this time, and I might do a little thing called switching teams. And that's kind of where I was going with this, is that I feel like Separatist members would switch teams, or just see the luxury in peace, and I think them switching teams would allow the Republic to say, well, maybe we don't need someone that's looking for war in our power, and I think they would elect Bail in power in place of him, because Bail was popular all across the board pretty much. He was pretty moderate, and he had more friends than Padme and Mon Mothma because of his moderation towards all that. But I hope you all enjoyed this story. If you did, leave a like down below. Hit that subscribe button. You know, we're heading for 50,000. Got more animations coming out for you guys. I love you all. Spread the love, and always remember, my friends, may the Force be with you.